The Enchanted Horse. It was the feast of the New Year, the oldest and most splendid of all the feasts in the kingdom of Persia. And the day had been spent by the king in the city of Shiraz, taking part of the magnificent spectacle prepared by his subjects to do the honor to the festival. The sun was setting, and the monarch was about to give his court the signal to retire, when suddenly an Indian appeared before his throne, leading a horse richly harnessed, and looking in every respect exactly like a real one. "Sire," said he, presenting himself as he spoke, "although I make appearance so late before your highness, I can confidently assure you that none of the wonders have you been seen during the day can be compared to this horse. If you will dare to cast your eye upon him, "I see nothing in it," replied the king, "except a clever imitation of real one, and any skilled workman might do as much." "Sire," returned the Indian, "is it not his outward form that I would speak, but of the use that I can make of him? I make only to mount him, and to wish myself to some special place, and no matter how distant it may be, in very few moments I shall find myself there. Is it this, sire, that's made the horse so marvelous, and if your highness will allow me, you can prove it for yourself." King of Persia, who was interested by everything out of the common, and had never before come across the horse with such quality, bade the Indian mount the animal and show what he could do. In an instant the man had walked on his back and inquired where monarch wished to send him. "Do you see that mountain?" asked the king, pointing a huge mass that towered into the sky about 3 leagues from Shiraz. "Go and bring me the leaf of a palm that glowed at the foot." The words were hardly out of the king's mouth when Indian turned a screw placed in the horse's neck, close to the saddle. An animal bounded like lightning up to the air, and was soon beyond the sight of even the sharpest eye. In a quarter of an hour the Indian was seen returning bearing in his hand the palm, and guiding his horse to the foot of the throne. He dismounted and laid the leaf before the king. Now the monarch had no sooner proof of the astounding speed of which the horse was capable than he longed to possess it himself, and indeed so sure was he that the Indian would be quite ready to sell it, that he looked upon it as his own already. "I never guessed from his mere outside how valuable an animal he was," he remarked to the Indian, "and I am grateful to you for having shown me my error," said he. "If you will say it, name your own price." "Sire," replied the Indian, "I never doubt that sovereign so wise and accomplished as your highness would do justice to my horse when he was new in power, and I even went so far as to think it probable that you might wish to possess it. Clearly, as I price it, I will yield up to your highness on one condition. The horse was not constructed by me, but it was given me by the inventor, in exchange for my only daughter, who made me take a solemn oath that I would never part with it, except for some object of equal value." "Name anything you like," cried the monarch, interrupting him. "My kingdom is large and filled with a fair city. You have only to choose which you prefer, to become its ruler to the end of your life." "Sire," answered the Indian, to whom the proposal did not seem nearly so generous as it appeared to the king, "I am most grateful to your highness for your princely offer, and beseech you not to be offended with me if I say that I can only develop up my horse in exchange for the hand of the princess of your daughter." A shout of laughter burst from the courtiers as they heard these words, and Prince Charles, the heir apparent, was filled with anger at the Indian's presumption. The king, however, thought that it would not cost him much to part from the princess in order to gain such a delightful toy, and while he was hesitating as to his answer, the prince broke in. "Sire," he said, "is it not possible that you can doubt for an instant what reply you should give to such an insolent bargain? Consider what you owe to yourself and to the blood of your ancestor." My son, replied the king, you speak nobly, but do you not realize either the value of the horse or the fact that if I reject the proposal of the Indian, he will only make the same to some other monarch? And I should be filled with despite at the thought that anyone but myself should own the seventh wonder of the world. Of course, I do not say that I shall accept this condition, and perhaps he may be brought to reason, but meanwhile, I should like you to examine the horse and, with the owner's permission, to make a trial of this power. The Indian who had overheard the king's speech thought that he saw it the sign of yielding to his proposal, so he joyfully agreed the monarch's wish and came forward to help the prince to mount the horse and show him how to guide it. But before he had finished it, the young man turned to screw and was soon out of sight. They waited some time, expecting that every moment he might be seen returning in the distance. But at length the Indian grew frightened, and prostrating himself before the throne, he said to be the king, "Sire, your highness, you must be noticed that prince, in his impatience, did not allow me to tell him what it was necessary to do in order to return to the place from which we start. I implore you to not punish me for what I was not fault, and not to visit on me any misfortune that may occur." "But why?" cried the king in a burst of fear and anger. "Why did you not call him back when you saw him disappearing?" "Sighs," replied the Indian, "the rapidity of his movement took me so by surprise that he was out of hearing before I recovered my speech. But we must hope that he will perceive and turn on a second screw, which I will have the effect of bringing the heart back to the earth." "But suppose he does," answered the king, "what is to hinder the horse from descending straight into the sea, or dashing him to pieces on the rocks?" "Have no fear, your highness," said the Indian. "The horse had the gift of the passing over sea, and of carrying his rider whenever he wished to go." "Well, your head shall answer for it," returned the monarch. "And if in 3 months he is not safe back with me, or at any rate does not send me news of his safety, your life shall pay the penalty." So saying, he ordered his guard to seize the Indian and throw him into the prison. Meanwhile, Prince Firoz Shah had gone gaily up into the air, and for the space of an hour continued to ascend higher and higher, till the very mountains were not distinguishable from the plains. Then he began to think it was time to come down, and took for granted of that. In order to do this, it was only needful to turn the screw the reverse way, but, to his surprise and horror, he found that, turn as he might, he did not make the smallest impression. He then remembered that he had never waited to act somehow he was to get back to the earth again, and understood the danger in which he stood. Luckily, he did not lose his head, and set about examining the horse's neck with great care, till at last, to his intense joy, he discovered a tiny little peg, much smaller than the other, close to the right ear. This he turned, and found himself dropping to earth, through more slowly than he had left it. It was now dark, and as Prince could see nothing, he was obliged, not without something feeling and discreet, to allow the house to direct his own course, and midnight was already past before Prince Firoz Shah again touched the ground, faint and weary from his long ride, and from the fact he had been eating nothing since early morning. The first thing he did on dismounting was to try to find out where he was, and, as far as he could discover in the thick darkness, he found himself on the terrace roof of a huge parade, with a broad thread of marble running round. In one corner of the terrace stood a small door, opening to a staircase which led down into the palace. Some people might have hesitated before exploring further, but not so the prince. "I am doing no harm," he said, "and whoever the owner may be, he will not touch me when he sees I am unarmed." And in dread of making a false step, he went cautiously down the staircase. On a landing, he noticed a open door, beyond which was a faintly lighted hall. Before entering, the prince paused and listened, But he heard nothing except the sound of men snoring. By the light of a lantern suspended from the roof, he perceived a row of black guards sleeping, each with a naked sword lying by him, and he understood that the hall must from the anteroom to the chamber of some queen or princess. Standing quite still, Prince Firoz looked about him till his eye grew accustomed to the gloom, and he noticed a bright light shining through the curtain in the one corner. He then made his way slowly toward it, and drawing aside its fold, passed it into a magnificent chamber full of sleeping women, all lying on low couches except one, who was on the sofa, and this one, he knew, must be Princess. Gently stealing up to the side of her bed, he looked at her, and saw that she was more beautiful than any woman he had ever beheld. But, fascinated though he was well aware of the danger of his position, as one cry of surprise would awake the god, and cause his certain death. So sinking quietly on his knee, he took hold of the sleeve of the princess and drew her arm lightly toward him. The princess opened her eye, and seeing before her handsome, well-dressed man, she remained speechless with astonishment. This favorable moment was seized by the prince, who blowing low while he knit thus addressed her. You behold, madam, a prince in distress, son to the king of Persia, who owned into an arranger so strange that you will scarcely believe it, find himself here, a supplant for your protection. But yesterday, I was in my father's court, engaged in a celebration of our most solemn festival. Today, I am in a no land in danger of my life. Now the princess, whose mercy Prince Forest Charles employed, was the eldest of daughter of the king of Bengal, who was enjoying rest and chant in the palace her father had built her, at a little distance from the capital. She listened kindly to what he had to say, and then answered, Prince, be not uneasy. Hospitality and humanity are practiced as widely in Bengal as they are in Persia. The protection you ask will be given you by all you have my word for it. And as the pin was about to thank her for her goodness, she added quickly, However, great may be my curiosity to learn by what means you have traveled there so speedily. I know what you must be faint or want for the food, so I shall give order to my woman to take you to the one of my chamber, where you will be provided with a supper and left to repose. By this time the prince's attendants were all awake and listening to the conversation at the side from their midst by they rose, dressed themselves hastily, and snatching up for some the taper, which lighted the room, conduct the prince to a large and lofty room, where two of the number prepared his bed, and the rest went down to the kitchen, from which they soon returned with all sorts of dishes. Then, showing him a couple of filled dress and linen, they quit the room. During the absence of the Prince of Bengal, we have been greatly struck by the beauty of the prince, tried to wait to go to sleep again. It was no use, she felt broad awake, and when her woman entered the room, she inquired eagerly if the prince had all he wanted and what they thought of him. Madame, they replied, it is of course impossible for us to tell what impression this young man had made on you. For ourselves, we think you would be fortunate if the king of your father should allow me to marry anyone so amiable. Certainly, there is no one in the court of Bengal who can be compared with him. This flattering observation will by no means displeasing to the princess, but as she did not wish to betray her own feelings, she merely said, You are our set of chatterbox. Go back to bed and let me sleep. When she dressed the following morning, her maid noticed that, the contrary of her usual habit, the princess was rarely particular about her toilet, and insisted on her hair being dressed 2 or 3 times over. For, she said to herself, if my appearance was not displeasing to the prince when once he saw me in the condition I was, how much more he will struck with me when he behold me with all my charm. Then she replaced her hair with the largest and most brilliant diamond she could find, with a necklace, barrette, and girdle, all the precious stone, and over her shoulder her lady put a robe of the richest stuff, in all India that no one was allowed to wear except members of the royal family. When she was fully dressed according to her wishes, she sent to know if the Prince of Persia was awake and ready to receive her, as she desired to present herself before him. When the princess messenger entered his room, Prince Firoz was in the act of leaving it to inquire if he might be allowed to pay his homage to her mistress, but on hearing the princess's wishes, he at once gave away. Her will is my law, he said. I am only here to obey her orders. In a few moments the princess herself appeared, and after the usual compliment had passed between them, the princess sat down on the sofa and began to explain to her prince her reason for not giving him an audience to her own apartment. Had I done so, she said, we might have been interrupted at any hour by the chief of Enosh, who has the right to enter whenever it pleases him. Whereas his forbidden ground, I am all impatient to learn the wonderful accident which has procured the pleasure of your arrival. And that is why I have come to you here, where no one can intrude upon us. Begin then, I entreat you, without delay. So the prince began at the beginning and told our story of the festival of the Rose held yearly in Persia, and of the splendid spectacle celebrated in his honor. But when he came to the enchanted horse, the princess was declared that she could never have imagined anything half so surprising. Well then, continued the prince, you can easily understand now. The king, my father, who has a passion for the curious thing, was seized with a violent desire to possess this horse, and as the Indian was some he would take for it. The man's answer was absolutely absurd, as you will agree, when I tell you that it was nothing less than the hand of the princess my sister. But though all the bystanders laughed and mocked, and I was beside myself with rage, I saw to my despair that my father could not make up his mind to treat the insolent proposal as it deserved. I tried to argue with him, but in vain. He only begged me to examine the horse with a view, as I quite understood, of making me more sensible of its value. To please my father, I mounted the horse, and without waiting for any instruction from the Indian, I turned the peg as I said him to do. In an instant, what I soaring up upwards, much quicker than an arrow could fly, and I felt as if much to be getting so near the sky that I should soon hit my head against it. I could see nothing beneath me, and for some time it was so confused, what did not even know what direction I was traveling. At last, when it was growing dark, I found another screw, and on turning it, the horse began slowly to sink toward the earth. I was forced to trust to chance, and to see what fate had in store, and it was already past midnight when I found myself on the roof of his palace. I crept down the little staircase and made directly for a light which I perceived through an open door. I peeped cautiously in and saw you, as you I will guess, the Onosh lying asleep on the floor. I knew the risks I ran, but my need was so great that I paid no attention to them, and stole stealthily past your guard to the curtain which concealed your doorway. The rest, princess, you know, and it only remains for me to thank you for the kindness you have shown me, and to assure you to my gratitude. By the law of nation, I am already your slave, and I have only my heart that is my own to offer you. But what I am saying, my own? Alas, madame, is what you are from the first moment I beheld you. The air which he said he would could let no doubt on the mind of the princess at the effect of the her charm, and the blush which mounted to her face only increased her beauty. Prince, returned she, as soon as her confusion permitted her to speak, you have given me the greatest pleasure, and I have followed you closely in all your adventures, and though you are positively sitting before me, I even tremble at your danger in the upper region of the air. Let me say what a debt I owe to the chance that had led you to my house. You could have entered none, which would have given you a warmer welcome. As to your being a slave, of course, that's merely a joke, and my reception must itself have assured you that you are as free here as your father caused. As to your heart, continued she in tone of encouragement, I am quite sure that must have been disposed for long ago to some priest who is well worthy of it, and I could not think of being the cause of your unfaithfulness to her. Prince Ferruchar was about to protest that there was no lady with any prior claim, but he was stopped by the entrance of one of the prince's attendants, who announced that dinner was served, and after all, neither was sorry for the interruption. Dinner was laid in a magnificent apartment, and the table was covered with delicious food, while during the repeat richly dressed girls sang softly and sweet to string instruments. After the prince and the princess had finished, they passed into a small room hung with blue and gold, looking out into a garden stocked with flowers and albasa tree, quite different from any that were before in the Persia. Princess, observed the young man, till now I had always believed that Persia could boast finer palace and more lovely garden than any kingdom upon earth, but my eye has been opened, and I begin to perceive that whenever there is great king, he will surround himself with building worthy of him. Prince, replied the Princess of Bengal, I have no idea what a Persian palace is like, so I am unable to make a comparison. I do not wish to discredit my own palate, but I can assure you that it's very poor beside that of the king my father, as you will agree when you have been there to greet him, as I hope you will surely do. Now the princess hoped that by bringing about the meeting between the prince and her father, the king would be so struck with the young man's distinguished air and fine manner that he would offer him his daughter to wife, but the reply of the Prince Persia to her suggestion was not quite what she wished. Madame, he said, by taking advantage of your proposal to visit the palace of the King of Bengal, I should satisfy more merely my curiosity, but also the sentiment of respect with which I regard him. But, Princess, I am persuaded that you will feel with me that I cannot possibly present myself before so great for sovereign without the attendant suitable to my rank. He would think me an adventure. If that is all, she answered, you can get as many attendants here as you please. There are plenty of Persian merchants. And as for money, my treasury is always open to you. Take what you please. Prince Firouzshah guessed what promised so much kindness on the part of Princess, and was much touched by it. Still his passion, which increased every moment, didn't take him forget his duty, so he replied without hesitation, I do not know, Princess, how to express my gratitude for your obliging offer, which I would accept at once if it were not for the collection of all the uneasiness the king, my father, might be suffering on my account. I should be unworthy in this of all love he showered upon me. If I did not return to him at the first possible moment, for while I am enjoying the society of the most amiable of all princes, he is, I am quite convinced, plunged in the deepest grief, having lost all hope of seeing me again. I am sure you will understand my position, and will feel that remain anyway one instant longer than necessary would not be ungrateful on my part, but perhaps even a crime, for how do I know if my accent may not break his heart? But, continued the prince, I have obeyed the voice of my conscience. I shall call the moment when your gracious permission I may present myself before the King of Bengal, not as a wanderer, but as a prince, to implore the favor of your hand. My father has always informed me that in my marriage I shall be left quite free, but I am persuaded that I have only described your generosity for my wish to become his own. Princess of Bengal was too reasonable not to accept the explanation offered by Prince Firouzshah, but she was much disturbed at his intention of departing at once, for she feared that no sooner had he left her than the impression she had made on him would fade away. So she made one more effort to keep him, and after assuring him that she entirely approved of his anxiety to see his father, begged him to give her a day or two more of his company. in common. Politely, the princess could hardly refuse this request, and the princess set about inventing every kind of amusement for him, and succeeded so well that 2 months slipped by almost unnoticed in ball spectacle and in hunting, of which, when the attended by danger, the princess was passionately fond. But at last, one day, he declared seriously that he could neglect his duty no longer, and entreated her to put no further obstacle in his way, promised at the same time to return as soon as he could, with all the magnificence due to her and himself. Princess, he added, it may be that your heart, your class with me with those followers whose devotion cannot stand the test of absence. If you do, you wrong me. And were it not for fear of offending you, I would beseech you to come with me, for my life can only be happy when passed with you. As for your reception at the Persian court, it will be as warm as you muchly deserve. And as for what concerns the King of Bengal, he must be much more different in your welfare than you have led me to believe he does not give consent of our marriage. The princess could not find words in which to reply the argument of the Prince of Persia, but her silent and her downcast eyes spoke for her, and declared that she had no objection and accompanying him for his travel. The only difficulty that occurred to her was the Prince Firouzschah did not know how to manage the horse, and she dreaded lest they might find themselves in the same plight as before. But the prince soothed her fear so successfully that she should have no other thought than to arrange for her flight, so secretly that no one in the palace should suspect it. Is what does. At early following morning, when the whole palace was wrapped in sleep, she stole up to the roof, where the princess was ready awaiting her, with his horse head toward Persia. He mounted first and held the princess up behind. Then, when she firmly seized, with her hands holding tightly to his belt, he touched the screw, and the horse began to leap earth quickly behind him. He travelled with his accustomed speed, and Prince Firouzschah guided him so well that in 2 hours and a half from the time of starting, he saw the capital of Persia lying beneath him. He determined to alight neither in the great square from which he had started, nor in the Sultan's palace, but in the country house at a little distance from the town. Here, he showed the princess a beautiful suite of rooms, and begged her to rest while he informed his father for their arrival, and prepared a public reception worthy of her ranks. Then he ordered a horse and to be saddled and set out. All the way through the street he was welcomed with shouts of joy by the people, who had long lost all hope of seeing him again. On reaching the palace, he found the Sultan surrounded by his minister, all clad in the deepest mourning, and his father almost went out of his mind with surprise and delight at the mere sound of his son's voice. When he had calmed down a little, he begged the prince to relate his adventure. The prince at once seized the open thus given him and told the whole story of his treatment by the princess of Bengal, not even concealing the fact that she had fallen in love with him. "And sorry," ended the prince, "heaven give my royal word that you would not refuse your consent to our marriage. I persuaded her to return with me on the Indian's horse. I have left her in one of your highness' country house, where she is waiting anxiously to be assured that I have not promised in vain." As he said, the prince was about to throw himself at the feet of the sultan, but his father prevented him, and embracing him again, said eagerly, "My son, not only do I gladly consent to your marriage with Princess of Bengal, but I will hasten to pay my respect to her, and to thank her in my own person for the benefit she had conferred on you. I will then bring her back with me, and make all arrangements for the wedding to be celebrated today." So the Sultan gave order the habit of mourning worn by people should be thrown off, and there should be a concert of drum, trumpet, and a cymbal. Also that the Indian should be taken from prison and brought before him. His commands were obeyed, and the Indian was led into his presence surrounded by guards. "I have kept you locked up," said the Sultan, "so that in my case my son was lost, your life should be paid the penalty. He has now returned, so take your heart and be gone forever." The Indian hastily quit the prison of the Sultan, And when he was outside, he inquired of the man who had taken him out of prison, where the prince had really been all this time, and what he had been doing. They told him the whole story, and how the Princess of Bengal was even awaiting in the Kranti Palace the consent of the Sultan, which at one put experience. Going straight to the country house, he informed the doorkeeper who had left Enchanted that he had been sent the Sultan and by the Prince of Persia to fetch the prince up on the ancient horse and to bring her to the palace. The doorkeeper knew the Indian by sight and was of course aware that nearly 3 months before he had been thrown into prison by the Sultan, and seeing him at the liberty, the man took for granted he was speaking the truth, and made no difficulty about leading him before the Princess of Bengal. While on her side, hearing that he had come from the prince, the lady gladly consented to do what he wished. The Indian, delighted with the success of his scheme, mounted the horse as if the princess mounted behind him, and turned the peg at the very moment that prince was leaving the palace of Shiraz for the country house, followed closely by the sultan and all the court. Noting this, the Indian deliberately threw the horse right above the city, in order that his revenge for his unjust impressment might be all the quicker and sweeter. When the Sultan of Persia saw the horse and his rider, he stopped short with astonishment and horror, and broke out of the oaths and curse, which the Indian heard quiet and moved, knowing that he was perfectly safe from the pursuit, but mollified and furious as the Sultan was. His feelings were nothing those of the Prince Firoz Shah, when he saw the object of his passionate devotion being borne rapidly away, and while he was struck speechless with grief and remorse, and nothing caused her better. She vanished swiftly out of his sight. What he thought to do? Should he follow his father into the palace, and there give rein to the spy? Both his love and his courage alike forbade it, and he continued his way to the palace. The sight of Prince showed the doorkeeper of what folly he had been guilty, and flinging himself at his mother's feet, implored his pardon. Rise, said the prince, I am the cause of this misfortune, and not you. Go and find me the dress of dervish, but beware for saying it is for me. At a short distance from the country house, a convent of dervish and situated the superior of Chalice was the doorkeeper's friend. So by means of the false story made up on the spur of the moment, it was easy enough to get hold of dervish's dress, with the prince at the one put on instead of his own. Disguised like this, concealing about him a box of pearl and diamond, he had intended as a present to the princess. He left the house at the nightfall, uncertain where he should go, but firmly resolved not to return without her. Meanwhile, the Indian had turned the horse to such a direction that, before many hours had passed, it had entered woods close the capital of the kingdom of Kashmir. Feeling very hungry, and supposing that the princess also might be in want of food, he brought his steed down to the earth and left the princess in a shady place on the bank of the clear stream. At first, when the princess had found herself alone, the idea had occurred to her of trying to escape and hide herself, but as she had eaten scarcely anything since she had left the Bengal, she felt she was too weak to venture far, and was obliged to abandon her design. On the return of the Indian with meat and warrior's kite, she began to eat voraciously, and soon had regained sufficient courage to reply with a spirit to his insolent remark. Caught by his threat, he sprang to her feet, calling loudly for help, and luckily her cries were heard by a troop of horsemen, who rode up in inquired what was the matter. Now the leader of these horsemen was the Sultan of Kashmir, returning from the chase, and he instantly turned to the Indian to inquire who he was and whom he had with him. The Indian rudely answered that it is his wife, and there was no occasion for anyone else to interfere between them. The princess, who, of course, was ignorant of her rank, of her will denied altogether the Indian's story. My lord, she cried, whoever you may be, put no faith in this impostor. He is an abominable magician. Who was it that taught me from the Prince of Persia? My destination had been, and has brought me here on this enchanted horse. She would have continued, but her tears choked her. And the Sultan of Kashmir, convinced by her beauty and her distinguished air of the truth of her tale, ordered his follower to cut off the Indian's head, which had done immediately. But rescued she was from one peril. It seemed as if she had only fallen into another. The Sultan commanded a horse to give in her, and conduct her to his own palace, where he led her to a beautiful apartment and selected female slaves to wait on her, or in order to be her guide. Then, without allowing her time to thank him for all he had done, he bade her report, saying she should tell him her adventure on the following day. The princess fell asleep, flattering herself that she had only to relate her story for the Sultan to be touched by compassion and to restore her to the prince without delay. But a few hours were to undeceive her. When the king of Kashmir had quit her presence the evening before, he had resolved that the sun should not set again without the princess becoming his wife, and at daybreak proclamation of his intention was made throughout the town by the sound of drum, trumpet, cymbal, and other instruments calculated to fill the heart with joy. The Princess of Bengal was early awakened by noise, but she did not one for a moment imagine that it had anything to do with her, till the Sultan, arriving as soon as she was dressed to inquire after her health, informed her that the trumpet blast she heard were part of the solemn marriage ceremony for which he begged to her to prepare. This unexpected announcement caused the princess such terror that she sank down to the dead faint. The slaves were in the waiting ran to her aid, and the Sultan himself did his best to bring her to the consciousness. But for a long time it was all to no purpose. At length her sense began slowly to come back to her, and then rather than break faith with the Prince of Persia by consenting to such a marriage, she determined the faint madness, so she began by saying all sort of absurdity and using all kind of strange gestures, while the Sultan stood watching her with sorrow and surprise. But as the sudden seizure showed no sign of abating, he left her to her woman, ordered them to take the greatest care of her. Still, as the day went on, the malady seemed to become worse, and by it is a word violent. They passed in this manner till at last the Sultan of Kashmir decided to summon all the doctors of his court to consult together over her sad state. The answer was the madness is so many different kinds that it was impossible to give an option on this case without seeing the princess. So the Sultan gave order that they were to be introduced to her chamber one by one, every man according to his rank. The decision had been foreseen by the princess, who knew quite well that if once she allowed the physician to fill her pulse, the most ignorant of them would discover that she was in perfectly good health and that her manner was fine. So each man approached, she broke out to such violent paroxysm that no one dared to lay the finger on her. A few, who pretend to be clever than the rest, declared that they could diagnose sick people only from sight, ordered her certain potion, which she made no difficulty about taking, as she was pursued by the all harmless. When the Sultan of Kashmir saw that the court doctor could do nothing toward curing the princess, he called in those of the city who fared no better. Then he had recourse to the most celebrated physician in the author's large town, but finding that the attack was beyond the science, he finally sent messenger into the author's neighboring state with the memorandum containing full of particulars of her princess madness, offering at the same time to pay the expense of any physician who would come and see her for himself, and a handsome reward to the one who should cure her. In answer of his proclamation, many foreign possessors flocked into the Kashmir, but they naturally were no more successful than the rest had been, as the cure depended on neither on them nor her skill, but only the princess herself. It was during this time that the Prince Firoz Shah, wandering sadly and hopelessly from the place to place, arrived to the last city of India, where he heard a great deal of talk about the Princess of Bengal, who had gone out of her sense on the very day that she was to have been married to the Sultan of Kashmir. This was quite enough to induce him to take the road to the Kashmir, and to inquire at the first inn at which he lodged to the capital the full particular of her story, when he knew that he had at last found the princess whom had so long lost. Her set about devising a plan for her rescue. The first thing he did was to procure a doctor's robe, so that his dress added to the long beard that he had allowed to go on his travel. My unmistakability proclaimed his profession. He then lost no time in going to the palace, where he obtained an audience of the chief usher, and while apologizing for his boldness to presume to think that he could cure the princess, where so many others had failed, declared that he had the secret of the certain remedies which had hitherto to never fail of their effect. The chief usher assured him that he was heartily welcome, and that the Sultan would receive him with pleasure, and in case of success, he would gain magnificent reward. When the Prince of Persia, in disguise of the physician, was brought before him, the Sultan wasted no time in talking, beyond remarking that the mere sight of a doctor threw the princess into transport of rage. He then led in the prince to a room under the roof, which had an opening through which he might observe the princess without him being seen. The prince looked and beheld the princess reclining on the sofa with tears in her eyes, singing softly to herself a song bewaiting her sad destiny, which had deprived her forever. Of the being she so tenderly loved, the young man's heart beat fast as he listened, for he needed no further proof that her marriage was vain, and that it was the love of him which had caused her to resort to his special object. He softly left his hiding place and returned to the Sultan, to whom he reported he was sure from the certain sign that the princess, my lady, was not incurable, but that he must see her and speak it with her alone. The Sultan made no difficulty in constating this, and the command that he should be ushered to the princess's apartment the moment she caught sight of his physician robe. She sprang from her seat in fury, and heaped insult upon him. The prince took no notice of her behavior, and approaching quite close, so that his word might be heard by her alone, and he said in a low whisper, "Look at me, princess, and you will see that I am no doctor, but the Prince of Persia, who had come to set you free." At the sound of his voice, the Princess of Bengal suddenly grew calm, and an expression of joy overspread her face, such as only comes when what we wish for the most and expect the least suddenly happened to us. For some time she was too enchanted to speak, and Prince Firoz took advantage of her silence to explain her all that had occurred. He declared at watching her despair before his very eye, the oath he had sworn to follow her over the world, and his rapture at finally discovering her in the palace at Kashmir. When he had finished, he begged in his turn that the princess would tell him how she had come here, so that he might the better devise some means of disclosing her from the tyranny of the Sultan. It needed but a few words from the princess to make him acquainted with the whole situation, and how she had been forced to play her part of the mad woman in order to escape from the marriage with the Sultan, who had not had sufficient politeness even at her consent, if necessary. He added she had to resolve die sooner than permit herself to be forced to such a union, and break faith with the prince whom she loved. The princess then inquired if she knew what had become of the enchanted horse since the Indian's death, but the princess could only reply that she had heard nothing about it. Still, she did not suppose that the horse could have been forgotten by the Sultan. After all, she had told him of his value. To this Prince agreed, and they consulted together over a plan by which she might be able to make her escape and return with him into the Persia. And at the first step, she would raise her tail to care and receive the Sultan with civility when he visited her next morning. The Sultan was transported with delight on learning the result of the interview, and his option of doctor's skill was raised still higher when, on the following day, the princess behaved toward him in such a way as to persuade him that her complete cure would not long delay. However, he contented himself with assuring her how happy he was to see her health so much improved, and exhorted her to make every use so clever a physician, and to report entire confidence in him. Then he retired, without awaiting any reply from the princess. The Prince of Persia left the room at the same time, and asked if he might be allowed humbly to inquire by what he meant the Princess of Bengal had reached Kashmir, which was so far distant from her father's kingdom, and how she came to be here alone. The Sultan thought the question very natural, and told him the same story that the Princess of Bengal had done, adding that he had ordered the enchanted horse to be taken, his treachery and curiosity, though he was quite ignorant how it could be used. Sire, replied the physician, Your Highness' tale has supplied me with a clue. I need to complete the recovery of the princess during her voyage hither. On the enchanted horse, a portion of the enchantment had by some means been communicated to her person, and it can be only dispelled by certain perfume, of which I pose the secret. If your highness will die to the consent, and to give the court and the people one the most astonishing spectacle they have ever witnessed, command the horse to be brought into the big square outside the palace, and leave the lead to me. I promise in that very few moments, in presence of all the assaulted multitude, you shall see the princess as healthy both in mind and body as ever she was in her life. And in order to make the spectacle as impressive as possible, I would suggest that she should be richly dressed and covered with the noblest jewel of the crown. The Sultan literally agreed to order that princess proposed, and the following morning he decided the enchanted horse should be taken from the treasury and brought into the great square of the palace. Soon the rumor began to spread through the town that something extraordinary was about to happen, and such a crowd began to collect that her guard had been called out to keep order, and to make a way for the enchanted horse. When all was ready, the Sultan appeared and took his place on the platform, surrounded by the chief noble and officials of his court. When they were sitting, the Princess of Bengal was seen leaving the palace, accompanied by the lady who had been assigned to her by the Sultan. She slowly approached the enchanted horse, and with the help of her lady, she mounted on his back. Directly she was in the saddle, with her feet in the stirrup, and the bridle in her hand. The physician placed around the horse some large braziers full of burning coal, into each of which he threw a perfume composed to all sorts of delicious scents. When he closed his hand over his breast and lower eye, walked the 3 times around the horse, muttering the while certain words. Soon there arose from the burning brazier a thick smoke which almost consumed both the horse and the princess. And this was the moment of which he had been waiting. Springing lightly up behind the lady, he leaned forward and turned the pig. And as the horse darted up into the air, he cried aloud so that his words were heard by all present. Sultan of Kashmir, when you wish to marry princess who have sought of your protection, learn first to gain their consent. It was in this way that Prince Persia rescued the Princess of Bengal and returned with her to Persia, where they descended this time before the palace of the king himself. The marriage was only delayed just long enough to make the ceremony as brilliant as possible. And as soon as the rejoicings were over, an ambassador was sent to the king of Bengal to inform him of the what is past and act his appropriation of the alliance between the two countries, which he highly gave. The end.